This is a few of our favorite things presented for Getman's Virtual Bibliophilic Holiday Gift Fair 2021 as part of the series Finders Keepers. I'm Diane Diaz-Stefazio, Acquisitions and Collections Development Librarian at the Ingalls Library, the Cleveland Museum of Art. And I'm also second-year member at large to the Rare Books and Manuscripts section, or RBMS, of the Association of College and Research Libraries, a division of the American Library Association. Today, my guest is Dr. Suzanne Karr Schmidt, a historian of early modern art, books, prints, and science. For 8 years, Dr. Karr Schmidt held a variety of roles, including assistant curator in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the Art Institute of Chicago. Currently, the George Amos Poole III, curator of rare books and manuscripts at the Newberry Library in Chicago, Dr. Karr Schmidt earned her PhD at Yale University. Much of her scholarship has focused on works of the Northern Renaissance, which should be understood includes developments in Germany, England, France, and other geographic regions generally north of the Alps. Karr Schmidt's monograph, Interactive and Sculptural Printmaking in the Renaissance, on pop-up books, appeared in 2018. More specifically, Karr Schmidt has been studying the works of German printmaker and theorist Albrecht Dürer, who lived from 1471 to 1528. Her presentation today centers on one volume of 3 books: Legendary Renaissance Printmaker Dürer, Censorship, and a whole host of other interesting features and themes. Albrecht Dürer may be known to our audience for his dramatic and complex woodcuts on biblical themes, numerous engravings, writing on geometry, human proportions, and fortification of cities, all of which were published in his native German and not Latin. Dürer was godson to printer Anton Koberger, and it is theorized that some of the woodcuts in the Nuremberg Chronicle were early Dürer creations. Dürer published 3 major works: 4 books on measurement, or Unterweisung der Messung mit dem Zirkel und Richtheit in 1525, various lessons on the fortification of cities, castles, and localities in 1527, and 4 books on human proportion, or Vierbücher von menschlicher Proportion, printed just posthumously in 1528. Dr. Karr Schmidt will walk us through the highlights of the Newberry Library's copy, which has all 3 titles bound together. In bookish terms, we call this a Sammelband. Now, a quick word of disclaimer. We're going to be discussing publications created in the 1500s that bring a long history with them. As with many publications created in the Age of Discovery, the book Dr. Karr Schmidt speaks about does include diagrams of the human body with an accompanying amount of illustrated nudity. Audiences who may find 16th century illustrations of the human body and brief mention of adult relationships objectionable are advised to view at their own discretion.
Welcome to the Newberry. I'm Suzanne Karr Schmidt, curator of rare books and manuscripts, and I'm going to talk today about a Sammelband, or bound width of 3 Albrecht Dürer books. And this is not the original binding, but as we'll see, I'm pretty sure these books belong together from the get-go. So here's book number 1, the Unterweisung der Messung, book on measurement. And Albrecht is doing this in 1525 as an attempt to share some of his knowledge, probably lorded over a few other artists to be in print. And in fact, it was in print quite frequently in Latin, Italian, French, and as were the other books, and became extremely popular. And it starts off with Euclidean geometry, and very specifically goes from a point to a line into more dimensions. And we'll see how it goes across all things like alphabets to geometric solids. So he invented the term of sort of a snail-like line, or Schnecken. So you actually see this sort of curlicue here. Lots of curlicues, really beautiful shapes, all sorts of ways that lines can be used in art. He had a little bit of a social conscience, so while he was making this, he did react to the Peasant War, which was going on in 1525, and this sort of fictive column is something that art historians have puzzled over. We assume that since his patrons were not peasants, he may not have been entirely for the peasants, but given that the peasant has a sword stuck in his back, there is an element of pathos as well. Here's a sundial. He's showing you how to build. Each of these sides with the pointer would actually be able to tell times. You get a sense of the three-dimensionality. He was very interested in a number of the sort of scientific debates and discoveries of the time. Here there is actually a correction being added in a separate little slip. So while there's an errata at the end, there was also a need to update in the text as quickly as possible. He would edit a version of this, which is still extant, with many, many different corrections and add different diagrams as well that would be published posthumously. But here, this is a first edition, but with the updates. Here's some of the alphabet. And then we're getting some of the geometric solids. Now, Dürer didn't actually make any prints that you could cut up and turn into 3D items, but he does show you how to turn paper into a globe. So these are long strips, a little bit ovoid and pointed at the ends, and you would cut them out, form them around a wooden core, and you could have a model of the heavens or of the earth, just like a globe. He was also thinking about perspective, which is something very important for artists at the time, and so you could see that you'd have to sort of stand further away to get the correct vantage point in this diagram. And then here's just another format here. And I'm working towards a exhibition on pop-up books at the Newberry from the 15th century on, and this would be Dürer's contribution to that. So book 2 is a treatise on fortifications, and still not for peasants. This is the coat of arms of Ferdinand, who would be Holy Roman Emperor later on. And you obviously, if you want to build fortifications, you are fortifying some kind of large architecture, you're building a moat, you're using a lot of capital to try to defend yourself. So the book has a lot of foldouts, a lot of images of cannons, which we'll look at in a minute, and give you a sense of massive architecture. So here's some very small cannons being shot off over moats at an enemy. And a much larger example, just to give you some of the specifications. And you can see a coat of arms on the barrel and a number of different decorative elements that show really how much of an art form casting cannons was at the time. And you can see that cannonball appears to be on a route. Book 3, which was published posthumously just in 1528, was edited by Willibald Pirkheimer, Albrecht Dürer's best friend, possible lover, and you can see the big AD monogram appears here. And later editions of the first book would have that added, but it was something that showed up in all of Dürer's prints, but wasn't always on his books. So you can see the branding, the marketing is happening really strongly here as we go into a period of sort of nostalgia for Dürer's art. This book has a lot of annotations, and here's probably the most lighthearted of them in this little curlicue in here with a tiny little face. That's something that's quite charming about it. But slightly less charming is the treatment of Dürer's friend Willibald. So his name is written in letterpress under here, but it's been blacked out in sort of one stroke, and then here it's been written over in a relatively indecipherable word, and it seems like it might be a Latin pejorative term that's really fairly nasty. So the fact that you have this editing, this erasure happening in the third book, as well as in the first, in this volume, suggests strongly to me that somebody close to Dürer in the mid-16th century owned all of these books. And here at the very end, you have Willibald, yet again, being blacked out. There's a couple more instances of censorship in here, though it's somewhat equal opportunity. And I don't know if that actually happened at the same time as cutting or canceling Willibald. But there you have it. But this book is about classifying body types, a little bit about movement. It's men, women, old and young, skinny, not so skinny, and so forth. So it's really a wide range of applications for it that were meant to help artists and in paintings, other prints, and things like that. Maybe even to just help them make a living. Dürer was very strongly in favor of using print because he thought that you basically could make so much more money once you have a replicable design as opposed to painting one painting. So the idea that he would make these 3 manuals for artists that were reproduced not only in this version but in many other languages really made his message go a lot farther. And I'm studying these Sammelband volumes where all 3 of the books are bound together to see what that meant culturally in Germany at this time and then even later, because he was such an important figure that people wanted it just for the name, but some people wanted to actually use it. And this is a fairly dirty copy. There's, besides the crossing outs, there's all sorts of smudges and fingerprints and other interventions. But the idea that these would have been used not only at the beginning but moving onwards is really wonderful. And so I think I have more to learn from this, but it's a really wonderful book to have in our collection.
Dr. Suzanne Karr Schmidt, welcome to a few of our favorite things.
Thank you, Diane.
Your presentation showed us so many good things. I'm not really even sure where to start. We have 3 books bound into 1 volume, censorship, questions about politics, and the book on fortifications. So I have to ask first, what is your favorite thing about this item you shared with us?
Well, I love that it's a record of this particular moment in time. As I think I argued in the clip that there are many different signs that these 3 works have always been together since they were printed. And even though the binding is not original, everything is of a piece, and it just tells you that someone, no matter how close they were to Dürer, valued all 3 of these books and saw them as a set, and they valued Dürer's work. There's their little notes in between a couple of them saying that I'm going to publish this next. This is the one that's coming after, and that's not exactly what happened. So it's sort of the owner reestablishing an order chronologically in this very interesting way.
Yeah. Gosh, so you mentioned that this book is not in its original binding, and we see it briefly. It looks like it's kind of in paper covers, maybe, or
sort of a cardboard. Yeah.
So this is not 16th century cardboard.
No, it's not.
What do you know about the ownership of the book and how it came to look like it does now?
We don't really know very much about it. Just what we can try to divine about the early owners through the marks that I really think would not have been made much later than even a decade or so after Dürer's death.
Okay. Yeah. And so there aren't any like juicy book plates or anything, let's say, like
not really. It's part of the Wing collection,
okay.
But I believe it was bought for it rather than coming in as part of the benefactor John Wing's collection or anything like that. So it's after 1919. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. One of the things that I noticed, and I don't know if other listeners picked up on this, but each time you turn the page, there was this very specific sound, right? Because it's old, awesomely old paper. Can you talk a little bit more about the paper and like maybe talk about the foldouts and how, for us paper nerds?
Yeah, no, I did a little bit of looking at some of the papers in between the books. I wanted to see if there was consistency in what was being used, although it was really at the behest of the publisher at that point. And I don't think Dürer had anything to do with the 1528 posthumous one, even though he'd obviously finished the book. And I was curious if some of these blanks are sort of required as part of each copy. And I think there's a blank in between each of them, so there's a little bit of a rest in between the three books. So yeah, I mean, the paper is, it's a wonderful, heavy rag content. So it's almost, closer to cloth than it is to more of a, tree-based acidic thing that might be more common in the 19th century to now, which means it's in really good condition. It's got a little bit of a size on it still, which is why you can hear the crackle, but it's really in good condition. It's not going to shatter when you turn the pages.
Right.
It's really wonderful that way. For the foldouts, those are obviously bigger pieces of paper,
Nice.
or perhaps unfolded sheets of paper. I'm not sure if there are any that had to be made for this particular book in even larger sizes, but yeah. So I think some of them maybe tipped in rather than bound in the same way as most of the gatherings. But yeah, they're really supposed to give you this larger scale, and that's actually something that Dürer was very good at with so the Apocalypse woodcuts, for instance. Nobody had made images of the Apocalypse that big, and that really allowed for more detail. I mean, in some ways, I think it might have been easier to carve for the Formschneider woodblock carvers. He sort of set up a whole new expectation. And while the diagrams in this book are not quite that complicated, I mean, there are a lot of geometrical shapes and so forth. In the human body, these three books, there are some very interesting moments as well, even if they're not full narratives.
Right.
So I've definitely seen, even in just our collection, people drawing from them and trying to use not even just the anatomy, but all three books, trying to sort of work through what Dürer was trying to teach them. So I think it worked in some ways, as it was meant to, as an instruction manual. Yeah.
Right. Is there, without giving away like information on patrons, of course, but what can you tell us about like the actual users of the book now in Newberry collections? Like who are the people who are requesting this item? And
oh, interesting. I don't know. I've been sort of holding on to it on a cart because I've been keep going back and trying to read that one inscription in different light, hoping to work with conservation on some other alternatives to try to read that a little better. But I mean, we're considering using it in an exhibition for various reasons. There's the foldouts or something that will definitely be in one way or another in my pop-up book show in 2023. Though I realized recently that there is actually another first edition German copy of the Unterweisung measurement book in the collection that has hand coloring. So I'm actually a little tempted to maybe use that one instead.
right.
And then that means my colleague working on the Race Before Race or Seeing Race Before Race exhibition will be able to use some of the anatomical imagery.
Interesting. Yeah, a good hand-colored old book is always a delight to see in an exhibition. So
even if you don't know exactly when the coloring was done,
right.
I was glad to see that whoever went in back in for this other copy actually colored those columns, of the peasant column and so forth. And then I saw the flaps and I said, okay, I think this is a little more interesting in some ways. I mean, you've got so many levels of interaction. I mean, it's people, learning from the diagrams, but then also adding back into them. So, and sort of interpreting them in ways that make it more interesting for them to use and move the flaps to show the perspective and so forth. So I really haven't seen many examples of that particular book with coloring. So I find that interesting.
Well, that's exciting. We will definitely look for that on the horizon in terms of new exhibition goodies. Gosh, so, I know. I want to talk more about your exhibition, but we can come back to that. There are so many stories in this book, like you mentioned the peasant column, and you showed it in your presentation, and it's kind of like, what is going on there exactly? Like, can you tell us more about like the background of how that item got into that particular book, and like what scholars think about what was going on?
I mean, it's a very odd thing. I mean, people have interpreted it with Dürer being supportive of the cause, the peasants being stabbed in the back, therefore they didn't get the recognition they wanted. I mean, it was a disaster. I mean, no, but they did not do very well with that particular incident. But then, it could also be a satire because there's sort of odd emblematic images in it. It's sort of, almost over-aggrandizing for satire purposes. I mean, it could be read either way. So it's really odd. And I think there's also a smaller column on the previous page with cows on it. So it's sort of, are we equating livestock and the poor peasants here? I don't know. So I don't think anyone's really clinched this particular thing. But art can be, left for the viewer's interpretation. I mean, that might be really what it's supposed to be. So people could, so Dürer wouldn't get in trouble with the patrons versus people who wanted to interpret it other ways. So,
viewed as a moment in time or viewed as the accumulation of all time that brought us to seeing it right now. So it's something I should remember from my art history theory class, but but it's either hermeneutics or otherwise something fun. You can look that up, viewers. So what can you tell us about Dürer's widow?
Oh, Agnes.
Yes.
Well, she's been depicted as being not so much fun to have around. I mean, there's some question of whether he was interested in women at all. They certainly never had children. He spent a lot of time having her manage sort of the financials, and she would go out and sell prints for him because Nuremberg was a big center for sales of a variety of different things, art. And I think she spent a lot of time at fairs there, sort of hawking his wares. She did travel to the Netherlands with him at sort of near the end of his life. So I guess he found, some benefit in her help there. I don't know. There's been some scholarship recently suggesting that she maybe it was a more loving relationship than it seems. There were definitely some odd letters.
So you were saying that Dürer's wife, and some recent scholarship kind of postulates that they may have had a more loving relationship than previous writing or thought.
Yeah, there are a number of letters of Albrecht's friend Willibald making rude jokes about Agnes, and Dürer doesn't always take it that well. So maybe there's a little something more there. But it seems like Dürer definitely spent a lot of time with Willibald. So from that standpoint alone, even if there wasn't an alternate relationship happening, I think he definitely was distracting Dürer with with humanism. Whatever it was, but he certainly had money and clout. So and a lot of enemies apparently. Karina Schleif, who was especially writing about Agnes. I had conversations about this in a little bit, and she did think that Willibald had a lot of enemies, so it didn't necessarily have to be Agnes sort of scrawling over the book. And
Right.
I'm afraid she probably didn't have classical languages. So yeah,
Right.
as I said, I really wanted this to be Agnes's book. In fact,
That would be great.
she retained the copyrights to a lot of the publications. she was sort of reprinting them. So she, from a business sense, yes, she was good. But the question, there may have been some appreciation of Albrecht there in other ways too.
Right.
So
right.
I think he probably would not have been as much of a success without her.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it sounds like one of my favorite things about Juror is his monogram, right? And how, like, to me, well, there's a whole other story about like how exciting was it to be in Nuremberg at this time. Talk about like the history of reading and the history of like publishing, but then Juror goes with this cool monogram of his AAD, and it's like recognizable no matter where you are. So I think it's really fascinating that shows up, but in the third book in this volume.
That's actually an interesting thing. They're in some of the later editions that are also posthumous, which Dürer edited. In some cases, the AD is everywhere, basically. It shows up on the measurement book as well, and that's pure salesmanship.
Yeah, he's like,
I don't know if he meant to put the AD on the anatomy book or not. I feel like it might have been a Agnes / Willibald thing, because Willibald was the one he did sort of the intro and sort of edited the anatomy to make it actually come out as a publication, which is part of why his name shows up in it so often,
many times.
to be blacked out. But there's an interesting story there. I don't think we have all the pieces.
Yeah, but just, so everyone else knows here, we know so much about Juror and his life because he had so many like diaries and other documents that survive him, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of, there's
and there are a lot of scholarship
to the Netherlands was very, especially was a little dry, sort of about, although it's very good for, cost of art, because he would talk about what he was trading his prints for, what this drawing cost, what he someone gave him in exchange, that sort of thing.
Right.
But they also, some of the other things where he was doing drawings of dreams and such things like that are really, really quite amazing, as it happens kind of history. So there's some things that he drew that have notes on the back about it that can be very helpful for the history. Yeah.
Right. No, we're super lucky to have all that. So shifting gears just a tiny bit to talk more about this physical object that you shared with us. So you mentioned in passing that there are multiple, am I getting this right? Sammelband volumes of Dürer work. So can you tell us more about those? Or are we just are we just talking about what's in the Newberry collection? B, are there common themes? Like, tell us more.
Well, okay. There are, I think I found over 20 volumes where it's just these three.
Wow.
Usually in this order. I think that's including Latin versions and some other translations, but sort of this urge to collect the whole set to document this particular artist. There's one at Lunda Hall that was owned by an Italian, I think it's the Italian in translation, that was owned by an Italian architect, for instance. I need to dig into those annotations at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, if you're being very strict about it and saying, okay, it's one volume, one binding, and all of the Dürer manuals are in it, there's probably at least 20.
Wow.
Probably more. There, I found a few still on the art market. So if you want to get one, they can be had. But there's some in private hands, lots in institutions. Yeah, but then if you start looking at where do other Dürer manuals show up, what is it bound with if it's not just Dürer, then you start getting a lot of Euclid, for instance. We have one. We actually have one of the the Latin printings of the measurement book, which in fact starts with Euclid. I mean, the dot, the line, etc., is Euclid. I mean, he mentions, he names drops him on the first page. It's not a secret. But yeah, no, we have a 16th century Euclid, and then the Dürer in the same binding, and there's sort of playing with diagrams and a little bit of cutting things out and leaving slips of triangles in there. So that's really exciting too. What is it when the two books are talking to each other? But no, I had seen a copy of several of these books, at the Art Institute when I did an exhibition there in 2011, and it sort of stuck in my head, and I was just trying to think, well, is it just that I've personally seen several of these that are bound together, or are there more of them? And it's a little bit difficult unless the copies are digitized perfectly with all three books together. Usually they're broken up, so you can get one book at a time, and you don't always get a sense of whether they're all bound together or not. So there's some sophisticated catalog searching that needs to happen, and sometimes you still need to talk to the curators to be sure. I think the National Gallery of Art has I think a copy owned by a sculptor, a 16th century Swiss sculptor maybe. But those are digitized separately, so you have to really dig into the record to see what they are with, to sort of confirm back that these are where they are. So yeah, no, I mean, you can put some of the pieces together, but it's not the first thing that is the main concern in cataloging is how the bound width looks and whether you can sort of browse in between them. So I'm sure we'll find more. I'm just trying to see what I can make out of that as a cultural cultural activity. You get all of these, and I mean, they're not always from the same era. Sometimes they're brought together from different languages, different published in different countries and so forth. So it's what does that say about the owner? So.
Right, exactly. Fascinating. Well, if anyone ever comes up with a census of all of them, then I would definitely be interested. So,
well, I have a small one. I'm hoping to turn this into an article or maybe a book. We'll see.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Okay, now I want to be sensitive of everyone's time, and we do have to keep things moving. So we talked about coming back to your upcoming exhibition. So is there any kind of sneak preview that you can give us, or tell us when it's on the calendar down the horizon?
Okay, it will be early 2023 at the Newberry Library, obviously.
Wonderful.
And it's basically looking at how people sort of played with what's called movable books, which is usually either a moving dial or volvel or a flap that you lift a little bit like the Dürer perspective items. But by going from the 15th century up to the present, and by that time we think of them more as pop-up books, which is technically a term when you open a book and something jumps out at you without you doing anything else. That's really the way that term is generally used. But I like to think about Renaissance pop-ups as a genre because they are things that become three-dimensional. There are a lot of instruments that are based on these dials. There are other kinds of sundials where you move bits around and it suddenly becomes something in more dimensions than two. So they're really quite fascinating. I think we're going to have. I'm really hoping to have a whole wall of books by one of Dürer's rough contemporaries, Peter Appian, who had a sort of a manual about cosmography, sort of study of geography and the sky and all sorts of things, perspective. I know everybody tried to put everything into the same manual in a way, but the fun thing about this book is that even from 1524 on, when it was first published, there were four dials in it, basically, which do things from showing you the lunar patterns, the waning of the moon. There's mapping happening. There's navigation and so forth, and telling time. And it was sort of a bestseller, and it was being printed into the 17th century. And clearly the original author didn't get a lot out of it. It sort of took on its own life with editions elsewhere in Europe, especially in Antwerp. He was printing in Germany, but just to be able to see how printers re-envisioned these moving pieces over the years. So I think I have 4 or 5 different languages of it. We're going to show the whole range from 1524 up to 1604. Wow. And some of them, my favorite, actually even have little lead weights on the ends of some of the strings. So they're not many that survive like that. I think I've seen maybe 3 or 4 sets of them, but it's something that would have been more common. It's actually pictured in some of the illustrations of the dials, showing where adding this little bit of help will aid your calculations. Right. So the Newberry has about 22 of these, I think, and they're, because one of our collectors, Edward Ayer, bought, I think, 18 or so, and because it had a map of a relatively early map of America, he was interested in basically the encounter between what he thought of as new and old world, but we just think of Europe and the Americas. But being able to look at the changes in printing depending on what house it was in, illustration style. I think they're all woodcuts, no engravings, but they do get more complicated. So just thinking about how many different ways you can play with the same content. It's movable content, but it's still effectively the same diagram.
Over time. Wow. Sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to it, even if I have to drive like 6 hours to get to Chicago from where I am.
When it happens. Yeah.
Excellent. Please do. Just in closing, the one thing that I also picked up on in your presentation was that, and we sort of talked about this a little bit already, but one of the things I love about special collections is that we are handling these books that have been handled by untold numbers of people over hundreds of years. And it puts me or whoever's handling the book into that timeline. We are part of this long lineage of collectors and readers and users. So you talked a little bit about how this book you just showed has evidence of use, and of course, obviously the censorship and other fun things like that. But what do these marks that are left behind tell us about the book's life? And is that of any use to scholars that you know of? Or?
Well, I mean, the very basic thing is that somebody read them. I mean, that's important. I think that's what any author wants, is for someone to read their book. Right. And if their fingers are a little grubby, fine. Maybe they read it more. I like the idea of these books existing in a workshop, for instance. Right. I haven't seen too many of them with paint stains on them or anything, but I bet there's some somewhere. Wow. Other books, often more in a devotional capacity. Devotional books often can be found with wax stains in them.
Oh, sure.
You're probably not trying to draw in the dark as much,
right?
But yeah, I mean, and I'm interested in the idea of what things are left in books. So you could have scraps with diagrams being copied. I've seen some of those. Sometimes people leave weird bookmarks, but yeah, just these annotations, censorship, corrections of any sort.
Right. I love the printing correction that you pointed out.
The little slip that was pasted in. Mm-hmm. Dürer had so many corrections for that book. That was just the beginning.
There's a bit of a perfectionist there.
Oh yeah. And the copy that survives in Munich, where he did correct everything, there are many, many more fold out little slips with diagrams where something was supposed to go. So wow. I never got the sense that the perspective flaps were a correction, but he clearly ran with this idea that you needed to you need to just get more in. And
Right.
I think my favorite page of that is the errata page, which he sort of just crossed all the way off because he's clearly going to have all of those corrections in this version. So it won't, you
Right.
won't need the errata page anymore.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just
Wow.
sort of, a big slice through it,
That's
diagonal line.
amazing.
But no, I think you have to look at how they compare to other copies, and
Right.
this is always 16th century books are made it this far. They've got a history, and they'll tell you about it if you look closely. So
Right.
that's what I like about looking for the fingerprints and so forth. And
Yeah.
and I mean, in manuscript studies, people are doing all sorts of wonderful things, and densitrometry, and
Right.
just how much people read certain parts of the book.
Right.
I think the easiest thing is if the back half of the book is totally clean, maybe it wasn't so interesting. So so how far do people get?
Right. Right.
So yeah, there are
Right.
lots of things you can pick up on from a dirty book.
Great. Great traces we leave behind and can learn from. So
Yeah.
well, Dr. Suzanne Karr Schmidt, thank you so much for being part of a few of our favorite things and adjusting to this different format, which has been a delight for me. It's been great learning more about this treasure of the Newberry Library, and hope to have you on again soon to talk about something else.
All right. Well, thanks, Diane. I really, really appreciate it.
All right.
Anytime I can talk about Dürer.
We'll sign you up for
Okay.
a usual slot. All right. Thanks.